What really happened with your host, Mike Rivero. You're listening to the Republic Broadcasting Network, where you'll find out what the Fukushima's going on.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It is Thursday, April 19th, 2018. Sure happy it's Thursday. Sure happy it's Thursday. Sure happy it's Thursday. We've got a lot of stuff to talk about today. A lot is going on around the world here. And the phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. Mike is in our control room, ready to answer the phone, put you on the air with your comments and questions, observations, and well, anything else you want to talk about here. All right, well, today, obviously being April 19th, it's Patriots Day, and it is the anniversary of the battles of Lexington and Concord, which kicked off the American Revolution. Basically, tensions were building between the 13 original American colonies and the British authorities, particularly in Massachusetts. So, on the night of April 18th, British troops marched from Boston to nearby Concord in order to confiscate the military arms of the colonists. Paul Revere and these other riders sounded the alarm. The colonial militiamen mobilized, and the British did not come out of it very well. The war was underway, and in 1783, the colonies formally won their independence, and that is the original Patriots' Day. Now, notice that what we're talking about here are military weapons. The British soldiers weren't interested in hunting weapons that put food on the table. They were interested in the weapons that could be used to resist British oppression, and it really didn't work out. And it was because of that attempt by the British to disarm the colonies that the Founding Fathers wrote that Second Amendment into the Bill of Rights. And it's been interpreted by the Supreme Court on numerous occasions, saying that it guarantees to the American people the same arms held by the uniformed services as a last resort to resist tyranny in government. Because the Founding Fathers understood that the curse of political power is that it will attract those people who should not be allowed to have it, as we are now witnessing in this day and age today. A couple of misconceptions about the battles of Lexington and Concord. Everybody knows about Paul Revere. His house is preserved along the Freedom Walk in Boston. Paul Revere didn't actually complete the ride. He stopped to have a meal, and the British caught him. And one of the other riders, William Dawes, actually completed the ride and completed the mission of sounding the warning. And Longfellow just dealt fame to the wrong guy. Maybe you couldn't find something that rhymed with Dawes. And also, nobody said, the British are coming, because the colonials all thought of themselves as British. It was the regulars are coming. The regulars are coming, the redcoats, as it were. And that's the original Patriots' Day, and there have been subsequent events that have happened on the same date. In particular, the final conflagration at that Branch Davidian church down in Waco, Texas. Now, there's been a huge amount of propaganda put out about, how evil David Koresh was, and they were all a bunch of gun nuts, and they were dangerous, and I remember they even made a TV movie about it that implied Koresh was molesting the female members of his church, and it, as usual, it's Hollywood serving the propaganda interests of the government. The real story about what happened there has to do with the fact that the BATF was in a lot of trouble. They had only a few years before been chartered with law enforcement powers. Prior to that, they were purely paper pushers. They collected the fees on alcohol and tobacco and gun registration, but they were not enforcers of the law. That had to be turned over to whatever law enforcement had jurisdiction in the area. But all of a sudden, the BATF got to be their own police force, and they got their own guns, and they got their own jackets. And there had been several serious, embarrassing incidents of the BATF raiding the wrong homes and shooting perfectly innocent homeowners who thought they were being home invaded and robbed, and they grabbed a gun to defend themselves, and the BATF shot them dead. And there have been calls for congressional hearings about rescinding the BATF's authorities in that area. So the BATF needed a publicity stunt of some kind, and they decided they were going to pick on the Branch Davidian Church because it was known they did have a lot of guns. Now, obviously, they were trained and knew how to use them. More importantly, though, they knew how to repair them. And that was how the Branch Davidian compound was supporting itself. Now, prior to David Koresh, his predecessor actually ran a meth lab in the church compound. And when David Koresh took over, the first thing he did was he called the police and said, "There's a meth lab on the property. I want you to remove it." The police came on over, and they took it away. And the church supported itself by buying old, used, broken firearms, refurbishing them, and then selling them at the Texas gun shows. Perfectly legitimate business opportunity. It's Texas. Everybody loves their guns. That's how they funded themselves. And Koresh was on good terms with local law enforcement. In fact, a week before the raid, Koresh had gone shooting with the local sheriffs. And he would bring the ammo, they'd bring their guns, they'd try out each other's weapons. It was all, friendly, neighborly fun. So the BATF figured, we're going to go on in there, we're going to scream that they had illegal weapons, we're going to raid them, we're going to seize all the guns, it's going to look really good on the newspapers. So they got a whole bunch of BATF agents together, and they called the local newspapers to come join them. And that's where things began to go wrong, because the reporter, one of the reporters assigned to cover the BATF, was friends with David Koresh. Waco's kind of a small town, everybody knows everybody. And he called up Koresh and said, "Are you aware the BATF are coming to inspect your guns and seize any illegal guns?" And Koresh said, "No, but there's no problem. There's nothing here for them to find." So the BATF shows up, Koresh opens the door of the church and is promptly shot in the crotch. And it all went downhill from there. Now, one of the articles I've put up documents how all the gunfire that was taking place at the Branch Davidian compound was coming from the BATF. And the reason for that is very simple. All of the working guns owned by the Branch Davidians were out at a gun show that day. All that was left were guns that were still broken, in the process of being repaired, refurbished, or stripped for parts. And the Branch Davidians just figured they were just going to wait it on out, and ultimately this became a huge embarrassment for the U.S. government, and that's when they sent in the FBI to basically knock holes in the wall with bulldozers and flood the place with CS tear gas, which is a tear gas, it's a chemical weapon that's illegal to use on enemy troops in time of war. That's how nasty the stuff is. And as a propellant to propel the CS, they used this chemical, I think it was called methyl acrylate. I'm not sure if that's accurate or not, but it's the same chemical that's used to melt those plexiglass shields you see over salad bars. It softens the plexiglass temporarily, and you can only imagine what it does to lungs. And of course, the official story is mass suicide, mass suicide. They burned themselves up. We know they did it. And that, too, is a lie, because most of the bodies were never autopsied. In fact, they were allowed to basically decay away to the point of uselessness. But there were some autopsies conducted. None of the lungs showed any sign of smoke inhalation, meaning they were all dead of the CS gas before the fire started. Now, compare that with what the U.S. claims Assad is doing in Syria. And do other countries have the right to bomb the U.S. because of what happened down in Waco? All right, we're going to do a shout out to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining the network. We're sort of commemorating Patriots Day, April 19th, battles of Lexington and Concord, Waco. We're going to be talking about the Oklahoma City bombing for a little bit, but first we're going to take a phone call from Kevin in West Virginia. Aloha, Kevin. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mr. Mike. I hope you're having a great and wonderful day. One of my questions that I have in this grand puzzle of Syria, if one of the puzzle pieces could be, there's a recording of Jared Kushner promising the head of Assad to the Saudi prince.
I'm sorry. Repeat that last part again.
There's a recording of Jared Kushner during the inauguration, when Trump first went over to Syria over to Saudi Arabia. Yeah. After he was inaugurated with Jared Kushner. And there is a recording of Jared Kushner promising the head of Bashar al-Assad to the Saudi prince. Could this be one of the driving forces why we went ahead and bombed them without any evidence. I'm wondering if that's one of the driving
I think it's
factors
more a case
behind
of bravado than anything else. Everybody loves to talk tough. We're hearing it from everybody in the U.S. government. We're the best. They're thumping their chests, and I think that's what Jared Kushner was doing. I don't think the U.S. is going to invade a country just to get the head of state. The sole exception to that, of course, being Panama. And Bush needed to get Manuel Noriega punching out license plates in Florida because Noriega had tried to blackmail the Bush family over their use of Panama as a waypoint for that whole Iran-Contra gun and drug running operation.
Absolutely. And then the other thing that I was wondering as well, if I was an enemy of Syria, speaking of Saudi Arabia or Israel, and you have the United States coming out and saying we're locked and loaded, I would assume and I would expect another false flag within the next couple of weeks.
I agree.
Would you?
In fact, I think it's going to be sooner than that because the last false flag is just blown up in their face and they need a distraction. Already the corporate media is out there saying, oh, well, Russia and Syria, they've cleaned up Duma, and that's why the inspectors are not going to find anything. I mean, they're just lying left and right, trying to recover from this epic fail. And my guess is that if they don't see that they're getting traction with the American people, there will be another false flag, and it'll be big and nasty and bloody, so that everybody moves on and forgets about the last lie.
Sure, I totally get it, and I don't think this has anything to do with making North Korea, and China come to the table. That agreement was already struck, a few months ago, to denuclearize and to a 10-year agreement with North Korea and South Korea for unification. I don't think that has anything to do with it either. But I am concerned that there is going to be another false flag, and I am concerned that if we do what we did, shooting missiles off into Syria, that Russia won't have restraint this next time. I am a little worried about that.
Yeah, I think you should be worried about it. And of course, Nikki Haley's been up at the UN saying that she's expecting Assad to launch a chemical weapon here in the United States of America. And obviously, chemical attacks in Syria lack a sense of immediacy and threat to the American people. And so I'm expecting there will be something here in the U.S., a chemical 9/11, if you will, where everybody's going to say, oh, my goodness, it could have been me, or I have family and friends there, and get everybody so worked up they lose their capacity to think rationally.
Sure, absolutely. And there was other big breaking news today. McCabe, he's being... I don't know if it was an indictment or something with McCabe saying that he will sing. If he goes down, he's bringing everybody down with him. My question is, Jeff Sessions, where are you?
Well, apparently, I.G. Horowitz did the referral himself and sent it to the Department of Justice. Now, obviously, Sessions can overrule it, but if Sessions quashes it and fails to act on the referral sent over by Congress, at that point, I think it's time for Trump to fire him and get somebody in there who's going to do the job. And I understand everybody's telling Trump, don't go there, don't go to the Clinton Foundation, don't go to the email server, you'll bring down the entire government. But at this point, it's like we had the caller called in yesterday, let the truth be told, though the heavens may fall.
Absolutely. Will you give Miss Claire the best? And I hope you have a great and wonderful day, sir.
Well, thank you very much. And we're going to switch over to Pete in Florida. Aloha, Pete. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. This kind of branches onto the Branch Davidian issue and the Second Amendment issue. I saw in Drudge today the report about some New York upstate farmer who got raided by ICE. They didn't have any kind of a warrant, and they were, roughhousing and whatnot. This right here is sort of the tyranny that's already undermining the Second Amendment, that the fact that if you read that, if you read it simply, if we were all strapped and wearing weapons every day, these police employees wouldn't be this brazen and disrespectful and unprofessional. And I think that Marbury versus Madison itself was probably the greatest act of tyranny when the judge employees decided to make themselves the interpreters of the Constitution instead of reading it as it should have been.
No, I disagree with you on that one. Basically, Marbury versus Madison made the American people the interpreters of the Constitution, and basically said, you don't need to wait for the Supreme Court to rule on the constitutionality of a law. If the law is repugnant to the Constitution, it is automatically null and void.
Well, there's another part. There's that second part that people overlook, and that's what I'm getting at. And the rest of it reads, and the Supreme Court has established itself or is responsible for interpreting the Constitution. That's why the Supreme Court comes out and pretty much decides everything on a whim instead of throwing it up against the Constitution. I just think that there's way too much corruption going on here, Mike, and I am
no question about it. And you raise a valid point, because nowhere in the Constitution is the duty of interpretation assigned to any part of the government. It was supposed to be left up to the American people. We know what the Constitution says. I've got a copy right here. I read it all the time. And that was what that first part of Marbury versus Madison said. If the people realize a law is unconstitutional, they are not bound by it.
Right. And I mean, Article 6, Section 2, Subclause 2, or whatever it is, that's part of the Supremacy Clause. It specifically reminds judge employees what their role is, and that is to uphold the Constitution, not to interpret that. And that's my thought for the day. My best to Claire. Have a nice day, sir.
All right. Thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go. And let's get on back to our commemoration of Patriots Day here by talking about something else that happened on April 19th. And that, of course, was the Oklahoma City bombing, which was basically Timothy McVeigh was the patsy. And I think Michael Herzog on his program last week said that there are now 4 of the witnesses to McVeigh's execution who have now come forward saying that he was still breathing after it was supposedly all over. So they probably, had him grow a beard and a mustache and a little plastic surgery, and he's out somewhere in the Midwest managing a Wendy's or something in the witness protection program. But the bombing never really made a lot of sense. I mean, that building was built to withstand all kinds of damage. General Benton Parton, who was running military development for the U.S. Army, came out with a report saying that truck bomb could not have done that damage. And every time there was another report about that Ryder truck, they kept enlarging the amount of AMFO that was in it, way past the point the truck could actually carry it here. On the day that the Murrah explosion happened, there were reports all over the media of additional bombs being found inside the Murrah building itself. Now, there was one survivor who had recently moved to Oklahoma City from California and understood about earthquakes. And he reported that the only reason he survived is he felt the building shake, thought it was a quake, crawled under his desk, and then the big truck bomb went off. And because he was under his desk, he didn't get killed. Well, that first shake he felt seems to be cutter charges. And by the way, that impulse is recorded on 2 different recordings we have on my page on the Oklahoma City bombing. But by far, the most damaging information happened quite by accident, if you will. There was a private pilot flying a plane and was just flying over the Camp Gruber at Fort Bragg's and looked down and saw this strange enclosure. There was a big screen around an area, and then there were these 4 tents and 4 trucks, one of them a Ryder truck. They were also screened from the outside from being seen. They didn't screen from above. Apparently, they didn't think they needed to. And this guy took the pictures. So what was the Army doing with that second Ryder truck is an important question. We got to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And we're talking about the Oklahoma City bombing, which happened on this day, Patriots Day, and all the very odd things there were about it, including John Doe number 2, because Timothy McVeigh was reportedly seen in the company of a second gentleman who just sort of disappeared from the official story, and he went away. Then there was Elohim City, where supposedly Timothy McVeigh was hanging out to plan all of this, and it was run by its founder, Robert Miller, who was later outed as an FBI informant. Now, one of the reporters who was there on the ground was Connie Chung, who is somebody I know from my days in Los Angeles when she used to work at KNXT. And I was in and out of the place all the time. I used to make pornographic balloon animals for her. She'd hide them under the desk during the newscast. And she's a lovely lady. And she was there, and she had heard a report that the fire department engines were deployed on neighboring streets around the Murrah building before the explosion happened. And she asked the fire chief that question on air and was immediately fired. This was a lady with a long experience, name, value, and credibility, and she was just let go like that. And finally, something, again, from a personal source, the minister who married Claire and I all those years ago happened to be near Oklahoma City when the explosion happened. So he did what a lot of people did. He drove on over and said, I volunteer to help search for survivors in the ruins of the building. And he had to show his ID something like 6 times before he was finally allowed through all the barricades and everything that had been put up. And he pointed out there was something very odd, because there were all these men in suits and ties who weren't looking for survivors. They were just gathering up all the papers they could, shoving them in boxes and taking them away. And then he saw these other men who were busy taping black plastic over the shattered ends of the load-bearing members of the building. Now, the plastic was far too thin to provide any mechanical support, and it looked to him like they just didn't want people looking at where those load-bearing members had failed. And I finally found a picture that confirmed his story. So why was the building targeted? Well, this goes all the way back to Waco, because the public outcry over what the government had done to the Branch Davidians was so great. Congress had called for formal hearings, and they had demanded all the evidence that the BATF and the FBI had on the Waco case be sent to Washington, D.C. And the FBI and the BATF had collected all that evidence together and stored it in the Murrah Federal Building in Oklahoma City. So all the evidence was destroyed when the building blew up, and the hearings had to be called off. Now, also in that building were medical records from military veterans who were suffering from what later came to be called Gulf War syndrome. And they were told it was all on their head. And these were documents showing that these soldiers had been exposed to depleted uranium and to U.S. chemical weapons in what were called the burn pits, and that there was a legitimate case for these people to be taken care of by the VA. All of that evidence also went up. Conveniently was in the Murrah Federal Building when it all happened. Okay, let's take some phone calls. We're going to start with Jerry in Chicago. Aloha, Jerry. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hello, Mike. Can you hear me?
Just barely.
Hello? Give me 1 sec. Hello, how about now?
You're much better. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, I was calling in about the Murrah's building. I was glued to the television that day, and I remember the governor of the state coming on in an interview saying that we have a bomb squad in the building right now that are trying to defuse at least two bombs.
Yes. Okay,
now how does that mean a lone truck bomb by Timothy McVeigh if they're defusing 2 more bombs?
Well, it doesn't, obviously, and I mean, even CNN was reporting that there were other bombs. The tape of the police radio was saying we've got to get people out of there. There are more bombs. And then the official story was later on declared, no, there was only the one bomb. There was only the one truck. It was all Timothy McVeigh. And, anybody who says anything else is just a tinfoil hat wearing crazy kook conspiracy theorist. But
Well, liars, cheats, and thieves, and it's 25 years. That's a quarter of a century so far, because that was 93 that this all happened.
Yes.
Okay. Well, hey, with that, man, thanks a lot. Keep up the good work. I sent you a donation. I hope you got it.
I probably did, and you should have gotten, if it comes by post, you're going to get a letter. If it came electronically, you're going to get an email. Anyway, we're going to take another break here for commercials. We have more callers waiting on the line, and we will be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're going to go right back to the telephones to Errol in the Netherlands. Aloha, Errol. Welcome back to the show. What's on your mind today?
Oh, I hear a big airplane coming over. Maybe you'll hear it.
Well, we have
okay.
a lot of aircraft over us right now. Everybody's taking advantage of the war fever to get their training flights in, and so they're turning and burning over our house all day long.
Yeah, but it's okay. It's okay. But what I wanted to say to you about the Oklahoma bombing, it was a patsy. It was a patsy. But we don't have a patsy for Building 7 that happened on 9/11. So that is a very interesting point to make, because Mr. Larry Silverstein, Steen.
Yeah.
In America you call it Steen, and in Germany you call it Silverstein.
Well,
So
there is a patsy for 9/11.
Wait,
Osama bin Laden.
I want to make a point. Mr. Silverstein, yeah?
Yes.
Before 9/11 happened, he made a deal with the banks to get a security on his buildings. Total security on his buildings.
Yes,
And
he insured the buildings against acts of terror.
Exactly. And do not ever forget, when I have pictures, and you can see them on the internet, you can research it, everything. It was pulverized. So when you got beton, how do you call it? Concrete. When you got concrete, it's pulverized. When you see the dust everywhere in that square mile, how long the dust was going, and I studied that, it was pulverized. And pulverizing means explosions. Exactly the same thing with the Oklahoma bombing, yeah, but in another way. It was from the inside outside, but a little bit, There were not so many analytic people with cameras.
Yes.
In that day of time, in the years. What was it? 91. Now we are talking about 2001. September 11, 2001. You see the pulverization. All the helicopters were flying above that, and they took pictures. And I got that picture. I got a lot of pictures. And when you see that smoke, it's not smoke from fire. It's pulverized. When you see pulverized stuff,
yes,
you analyze it.
Well, that's what General Parton was pointing out in his Eglin blast effect study. Is that for that kind of damage to be done to the building and that kind of pulverization of the concrete takes high brisive explosives, and ANFO does not qualify as that.
And that is my point. Just what I want to say is, now they had that time Timothy McVeigh. Okay, that was the Oklahoma City bomb, but that was a test, because who were in those buildings? Who were in those buildings? Who were in who were in those buildings, and who was on 9/11 in Building 7? Exactly the same people.
Well, Building 7 was evacuated successfully before it was brought down.
But who worked in that? Who worked in that?
Yeah, it was a government building, the same as the Murrah building.
The FBI, the NSA, all papers were in there. So it was also destroyed.
Yes.
Exactly the same. Exactly the same. Thank you, Mike. Bye.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to switch over to Mark in North Carolina. Aloha, Mark. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
How you doing here, Mike?
Doing okay.
Mike, a couple of things about this, Oklahoma City. I wish you would try to get on your show, former police officer, Oklahoma City police officer, canine officer, one of the first officers on the scene, Donald Browning. He actually saw the explosives inside the building. He was
okay.
By the FBI. He was threatened by the FBI later on. Right, him and his family. He's been on the show, but years ago, some years back. I haven't heard of much about him since. The other person you should have on, I wish you would have on, there was that film, A Noble Lie. You might know something about that film. He was in that. Another person I wish you'd have on is Cody Hodges. I tell you, this guy is a former operations. He was like a contractor for the CIA, and he committed certain acts around the world. But he was he was offered the job. I think it was offered like $1 million to blow up the Murrah building about a year before it was blown up, and he refused. He said that pushed the line. And since then, he was like an outcast. And now he's coming out and saying, I think he's written a book. He's been in quite a few internet shows. Alex Jones, for some reason, hasn't had him on. John B. Wells, yes, he was on John B. Wells. He was on the Hagman. He was on the Hagman Report a couple of times. Since then, they've tried to kill him. He was a car accident in Colorado where he lives. This guy is really, I wish I know he'd come on if you contacted him. And the other thing about it is this, I don't know if you ever heard of Sergeant Terrence Yankee.
Yeah, I remember
he was he was murdered by the FBI, most likely the FBI, and tortured. And then they tried to say he committed suicide. There's no way he committed suicide the way it was described, right on federal land. And he said the feds were chasing him at the time. He called in that the feds were chasing him at the time. And he was this man's a hero, and I wish people would know more about him. And I pray for his soul, because this man, like I said, was a true. When we talk about a hero, that's a true hero. Okay, because he knew he was being threatened and all that. He had the information also that there were explosives inside the building. He came up with it. So obviously you can't have him as a guest, but you could have Sergeant Browning on, or Officer Browning. I'm not sure it was a sergeant or not. He's retired now, And I wish he made an attempt to do that, because this is another false flag. This is another thing where the FBI, the CIA is probably involved too. For whatever reasons, one to make conservative, I guess, to make right-wingers look bad. The other thing is, I understand there were certain records they were keeping inside of the building. That was Hodges said. There were certain records that they didn't want coming out about the depleted uranium.
Yeah, we mentioned that.
You did mention? Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, Hodges mentioned, was talking about that was the main reason they wanted to blow that building up.
Well, the main reason they wanted to blow that building up is they put all the evidence about Waco in there in advance of congressional hearings.
Well, that too. And and like I said, what's his name was he was just a patsy. McVeigh was just a patsy. Why McVeigh didn't talk or say anything and just went to his death the way he did, I don't know. Some people don't believe he was even executed, that he walked out the back door, that he might have been an operator himself. Whether that's
a lot of people thought that studying his early career of going around the country and trying to infiltrate these various patriot groups, the primary theory is he was an FBI informant, and he was selected to be this star of the Oklahoma City bombing. And as I mentioned earlier in the program, last week Michael Herzog on his show said that there are now 4 of the witnesses to the execution who have come forward saying that McVeigh was still breathing after it was supposedly all over.
Yeah, I suspect that's a good possibility. I don't think he was just an informant. I think he was actually an operative. I think he was still probably with the military and was actually an operative. He wanted it, supposedly the story is he wanted to get in special forces. He couldn't make it. I don't know if that's really true either. That could be also a cover story.
Yeah.
But I'd have still been working for the military in certain capacity. They're not supposed, military's not supposed to be doing this, but everybody knows they do it. They have certain people that do stuff like this.
Well, all the agencies do here. All the agencies do, and this appears to have been primarily an FBI BATF operation because they were the ones whose rear ends were in a sling, along with the Pentagon for the medical information on the veterans. Anyway, Mark, we're going to let you go. I want to finish up here and then get into the current news. Okay? All right. Thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go. Now, finishing up on the Oklahoma City bombing. Name that you probably have not heard of before is a guy named Harry Everett, Everhart, rather, and he witnessed the blast from nearby, and he basically made the first official report of the explosion by calling the BATF office in Dallas to say someone has just blown up the federal building in Oklahoma City with a truckload of ANFO. One wonders how he knew what the explosive used was. Well, it turns out Everhart was the BATF's expert on ANFO explosives, and records are indicating that Everhart and his associates spent the year before the Oklahoma City bombing out in New Mexico loading and then blowing up at least 8 trucks in test bombing experiments. So they wanted this thing well rehearsed. Anyway, that's Oklahoma City bombing, and I do like to mention these things on April 19th, but the rest of the show is going to be in the here and now, because it was back in 1995. And here we are in 2018. So it's 23 years ago that this happened. All right, getting on over to Syria, we're seeing the entire American political establishment pretty much agreeing, yes, we're going to have a war against Assad. War, it's fantastic. We're going to go. No, actually, your kids are going to go. We're going to stay here in the Capitol building and applaud ourselves for how tough and butch we really are. And already they're pouring out the propaganda that the American people support the invasion of Syria. This one comes out of Washington's blog. And they're already out there showing awareness that people don't always trust the external polls here. So the way they pose this is the first even marginally trustworthy poll of American registered voters. And then it goes on to say that the majority, an overwhelming 66% support the invasion. And if you believe that one, I have some of Saddam's nuclear weapons to sell you. Now, obviously around Hawaii, we talk a lot of military here. I have yet to meet anybody who supports the attack and invasion in Syria. Not even one. So to find out what's really going on, talk to your friends and neighbors, and you'll get a more accurate picture of what's going on. We, of course, did a poll at whatreallyhappened.com, and do you support the invasion of Syria? No, won with 99% of the vote. There were 5 people who voted yes, and I assume that they're monitoring the site for various government agencies. Let's go back to the phones. Dustin in New Jersey. Aloha, Dustin. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
I didn't vote either, though, so I can't. I'll vote. I don't believe it. Hey, Mike, I'm getting some news alert from Russia. Russian Navy has expanded its strategic capabilities, and it's see 1 new subs commission. You have 3 ships and auxiliary ships. You got 46 more caliber missiles added, 2 helicopters, and I think there's a reconditioned submarine called Tula. Underwater missile cruiser, it's called.
Okay.
So that's some updated news on that. Hey, Mike, did you hear a report just coming out? I think it came out of Lancaster, Pennsylvania yesterday about a tractor-trailer truck missing from a work site that has 640 pounds of explosives on it.
I missed that one, but that may be the prelude to the false flag attack that's supposed to get us all riled up to want to go and throw our children onto the bayonets on the other side of the world.
That's kind of a lot of explosives. 640 pounds of I mean, can you imagine if they set that off in like Holland Tunnel or something? Say if they can get over, Pennsylvania's not that far.
That's a lot of explosive. Of course, it depends on what kind of explosive it is, as to what the effects would be.
And then I gotta ask you about that police getting ready in riot gear in was it Pittsburgh?
Yeah, we're going to be talking about that later in the show.
Can I just say something real quick? Like, nobody even knows who Bob Mueller is. Most of the people, they don't give a crap.
Yeah.
So I can't just. Yeah. So it just smells of orchestration, like right off. If you ask the average American, they don't even got to know what a Mueller is. I mean, come on. Who's buying this? This is ridiculous.
Apparently, Rosenstein has just told Donald Trump that he is not a target of any part of the Mueller probe. Well, if that's true, it's time to shut down Mueller because his entire mandate as special counsel was the Trump-Russia collusion. And, of course, there is no crime of collusion under U.S. law. So it was a made-up issue to begin with. And instead, Mueller is out there, just thrashing around, trying to regain his credibility by just, beating up on anybody he can find.
Oh, and then real quick, going back to Syria, I forgot that they Syrian army started their kicking out of the talks failed against the Daesh or whatever, so they're going in there and cleaning out house. Since hey, they want to get on the buses, they're going to go to the graves.
Well, Iraq has launched an anti-Daesh operation in coordination with the government of Syria. So I think basically they're just going to wipe them out, the ones that refuse to surrender, and that will be the end of it. The U.S. will not have a legitimate reason to be in Syria. So they're going to have to gin something up. And so I agree with that earlier caller. There's going to be another false flag that's going to be blamed on Assad. And it's going to be big, and it's going to be nasty, and it's going to be so scary that the American people will be too terrified to think clearly.
Well, that's going to pull Russia in, and it'll be World War III. Hey, Mike, I would probably take at this point the Saudi Arabians, they're running out of forces to send over at this point.
Well, that's why they're down there in Africa recruiting mercenaries.
Yeah, like in Yemen. If anybody goes on YouTube, look up Yemen, Sudanese in Yemen for Saudi Arabia, and poor souls, man. They have money all over the place, Saudi money, and they can't spend it because they're dead in the desert.
Anyway, Dustin, I got to let you go. Got a commercial break. We'll be right back with more phone calls. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're going to go back to the phones here. Roxanne in Texas. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi. I just wanted to follow up on yesterday, the last call about the airplane. Do you know the Mythbusters series?
Yes.
Well, they did one called Explosive Decompression. It's about 5 minutes, and it sort of pulls the theory of pulling the passenger out the window. They debunked that. So I'd encourage all of the audience to listen or watch that video. It's pretty cool. And because we know every 3 years the FAA, they tell all the airports, the big ones, to do the drills. So they've been going on a lot. I know one was in Abilene the other day.
Okay, well, let's back up here a little bit. First of all, as big a fan as I am of Mythbusters, I've never seen the show that you're describing. And while the sudden decompression of an airline cabin is not as violent as it's often depicted in movies and TV, it does happen. And if you're sitting in the seat next to the window that blows out, which in this case was destroyed by a fragment of the exploding engine, yes, there's going to be a tremendous vacuum that will try and suck you out. And it's not just the interior pressure of the airline cabin, it's also the Bernoulli effect of the airstream going past the outside of the aircraft. And that's going to create a huge suction as well. So,
Well, I'll just encourage everybody to watch it because it explains exactly this. But
well, could you send me
your arm might get sucked out.
Can you send Okay, Roxanne, can you send me the URL to the video? I'd like to look at it myself before we recommend that anybody else take a look at it, okay?
Okay, it's just explosive decompression on YouTube Mythbusters. It's that simple.
All right, I'll take a look for it. I'll take a look for it after the show today.
But I also wanted to comment on, I know that Tony guy, and he used to make movies in Hollywood, and he was a producer, and he was short of having his own studio, and Spielberg went in and destroyed him. And that's it.
Okay, well, thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go, and we're going to take one more phone call. Then we're going to close the phone lines because I've got a lot of stuff I need to get to today. Mike in Fort Lauderdale, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Salutations, sir. I just thought I would share another statistically impossible abnormality, but you know, it's the anniversary today, the 70th anniversary, today's date right now, of Israel.
Oh, good for them.
Yeah, it's their birthday. Just coincides with Oklahoma City. It's just very strange, statistically very strange, but just so happens it's their birthday as well.
Okay, well, thank you for the information. We're going to let you go. And I am, in fact, looking at that Mythbusters video, and they're basically saying that a person wouldn't be sucked out of the plane completely, which is what happened in this case. This woman, only the top part of her body got sucked out of the plane, and she died from blunt force trauma to her arms and torso and head. So, anyway, there's the music. We're going to take a break for station identification. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here, hour number 2. The phone lines are closed because I need to get some news out here before the phone calls come on in. We're talking about Syria. We're talking about what's going on over there. And all of a sudden, following that epic fail of a missile attack last Friday, that Trump is back to talking about pulling the U.S. out of Syria, but replacing the U.S. forces with a coalition of Arab states. And apparently the founder of Blackwater, Sea Academy, whatever they're calling themselves this week, Eric Prince, says that he has been informally contacted by Arab officials in order that Blackwater would train the Arab forces to dominate Syria, which is what mercenaries tend to do. And maybe these other Arab nations want to have mercenaries doing the dirty work for them. As I mentioned to that caller, Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates are down in Africa recruiting mercenaries right now and deploying many of them into Yemen at this particular point. Lockheed Martin is out there strutting their stuff over the not quite stellar success of the Tomahawks last Friday, but they're ready to assist with more missiles. And they're out there pushing forward on a program called JASSM, J-A-S-S-M, which I think stands for Joint Air Superiority Standoff Missile, -ER, Extended Range. And apparently they debuted that weapon for the first time last Friday. We don't know how well it did, but the Air Force CENTCOM has confirmed that 19 of the JASSM standoff air-launched cruise missiles were used last Friday. They're about $1.75 million each, for those of you who are watching your pennies over there. And apparently there are some problems with reliability on that, and they're already out there deploying that. All of America's weapons seem to have these shortcomings and issues, and it isn't just America, because during last Friday's attack on Syria, there was a French frigate that failed to launch its salvo of 3 naval cruise missiles. Fortunately, there was a sister ship, the Languedoc, which was able to step in and fire their missiles as well. They're saying it's unknown what the technical problem was, but it will be investigated. Especially in the dirt and dust and confusion of war, simple is better. And I think one of the problems that the U.S. is dealing with right now is they've gone too far into this high-tech wonder weapon mentality, which ultimately was the Nazis' big mistake in World War II. And they did come up with some amazing stuff. The first stealth fighter, the first jet fighter plane, the V-1 buzz bomb, the world's first cruise missile, the V-2, the world's first ballistic missile. But they were hideously expensive, and they couldn't produce them in enough volume to materially change the outcome of the war. Now, Syria's forces are continuing to clean out East Ghouta, and they keep stumbling on more and more of these chemical weapons laboratories in the militants' positions. And in the last one, they found containers with chlorine that are from German companies and smoke grenades from Porton Down, Great Britain. So once again, we're finding out that the chemical weapons in Syria aren't from Syria. Now, a lot of articles have come on out basically talking about this fake chemical weapon attack. And apparently reporters tracked down the boy who was sort of featured in that tape. And the story is that apparently they were rounded up and taken to the hospital and treated for dust inhalation, and then they were given food. They were lured to the hospital with food. They didn't have food for that day. And the boy has said there were no chemical weapons. The hospital staff is saying no chemical weapons. The father is saying no chemical weapons. But somebody just went on out and just said, we're going to grab a bunch of people. We're going to make a video, obviously the white helmets. And in keeping with that, in those chemical sites in eastern Ghouta, they're finding white helmet uniforms, jackets, helmets, and so forth. So we know which side the white helmets are actually working on. Now, earlier we were talking about this independent reporter, Pearson Sharp, who got into Duma and was reporting, same thing everybody else is, no signs of a chemical weapon attack. And he basically came on out with a video, which is currently on BitChute, because when he posted it on YouTube, YouTube removed it immediately. So YouTube cannot be trusted at all. Anything that goes up that questions the official story on anything is going to be removed. All right, we're going to do a shout out to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining our network. Now, there's been yet another delay in getting the OPCW scientists to the actual site where the chemical weapons were supposed to have been used. And it's been blamed on the Russians, blamed on the Syrians, blamed on so forth. It turns out it's the United Nations Department of Safety and Security that is preventing the chemical inspectors from entering Duma, and they're citing safety concerns. And they're not saying when the scientists will be allowed in there, probably after somebody's planted a bunch of evidence for them to find. And they tried to get to the site the first time, and the first time there was a large crowd there, which right there tells you there's no chemical weapons, or they wouldn't be standing around like that. And the second time is the incident where there was gunfire and an explosion. So it's the UN that's blocking the OPCW from getting on in there. Now, as I mentioned to that caller, Iraq is carrying out airstrikes on Daesh sites in Syria in coordination with the Syrian government. And I think at this point, it's just a matter of time before Daesh, ISIS, ISIL, is, whatever they're calling themselves this week, they're going to be gone. Now, the other day we were talking about how Roger Waters, back on last Friday, was doing a concert in Barcelona. And he, right in the middle of the show, between songs, just read the Syrian White Helmets, the Riot Act. He described them as a fake organization that exists only to create propaganda for jihadists and terrorists. And a lot of people applauded him for saying that. As it turns out, emails have been released showing that the White Helmets approached Roger Waters to give them a plug during his concert, for which they were going to pay him, apparently with funds provided by Saudi Arabia. And I guess Roger Waters decided he was not for sale that cheap, and he just got really kind of ticked off. Now, over in Iran, they're starting to speak up about Trump's impending deadline. They're obviously delighted that the EU has not imposed any new sanctions on Iran. Iran is in compliance with the P5+1 deal, or the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, for those of you who are gratuitously polysyllabic. And Iran is saying they are now ready for whatever is going to happen relative to the P5+1 deal. If the deal continues, they will comply with it fully, as they already have been all along. They insist the U.S. comply with their half of it, which the U.S. has not. The U.S. keeps adding more and more sanctions on Iran and making more and more demands for Iran to get rid of its weapons of deterrence. Now, Rouhani is out there saying that Iran has every right to build or acquire any weapons necessary to defend the country from invasion. And it was making a speech on Iran's Army Day, and he said a strong military is an effective deterrence against foreign threats. So they're dropping hints here. And the other day, we had that story about how China is going to get involved in Iran's nuclear program. And the initial assumption was they were coming in along with Russia to build more nuclear power plants. Well, maybe there's something else in the works. Maybe if Donald Trump pulls out of the P5+1 deal, Iran is simply going to buy some nuclear weapons from China, because they know an invasion is on the way. And the only way they can stop it is to have nuclear weapons. What Trump did in Syria has incredibly destabilized the world. Everybody now knows the U.S. government can't be trusted. Everybody understands that the U.S. government is starting these wars of conquest with lies, deceptions, frauds. And everybody understands that the U.S. Should not be trusted when it says, if you give up your weapons of deterrence, we promise we will leave you alone, because the U.S. keeps breaking that promise. Now, the corporate media and the White House are out there acting like denuclearization is a done deal with North Korea. I would not be so quick to assume that, especially after last Friday. Because North Korea's government, Kim Jong-un and all of his associates, if they weren't already aware of what the U.S. is doing, they are now. Over in Israel, Netanyahu, who is desperate to distract from his corruption issues, is issuing warnings to Iran, saying that Israel will defend itself against anyone who tries to harm it. Well, Iran hasn't tried to harm Israel. Quite the other way around. Iran hasn't initiated a war of conquest against another country in 200 years. It's not their nature. And if you contrast that with Israel, Israel can't seem to go 6 months without attacking or bombing somebody. And if they can't find a decent target in Syria or Lebanon, they just go bomb Gaza again, just to stay in practice. Now, Tel Aviv's education minister, Naftali Bennett, is screaming that Iran is trying to break Israel's spirit, which I'm not sure exactly what he means, but he's out there saying the Iranian octopus is trying to strangle us and break our spirit. And he went on to say Israel is stronger than those against us. So I'm getting a strong feeling that Netanyahu, realizing that the U.S. may stumble in the war agenda in Syria, may be about to try and crank up the war with Iran all on his own, knowing that the U.S. government has already committed to coming in on Israel's side of any war, even if Israel starts it. So we're going to see what's happening there. Yemeni forces have targeted an airport on Saudi soil with a domestically manufactured ballistic missile, and I love the way they keep emphasizing that they're making their own rockets. Because every time Yemeni forces do anything, they're saying, oh, Iran is obviously supplying them. Iran is supplying. How is Iran supplying them? Nobody can get in or out past the U.S.-Saudi blockade. They can't get food in there. They can't get medicine in there. You know, how is Iran getting all these rockets and weapons in there? Do they have the Starship Enterprise up overhead with a transporter just beaming the stuff down to the ground? Sometimes I really get angry at all the lies. Apparently, more scientists have come forward about the Skripal case and saying that they continue to find trace chemicals inside the samples of whatever was used to poison the Skripals. And they're saying these track back to Western labs. The latest one is the head of the Chemical and Biological Weapons Restrictive Conventions Analytic Research Center under the Ministry of Industry and Trade of the Russian Federation. Viktor Kolstov said that the chemical agent in Skripal's poisoning case has been produced in Western laboratories. Don't forget that Swiss lab found that BZ toxin was in there, which is a hallucinogen. And it's produced in the U.S. and Great Britain. It is not produced in Russia. It's a powerful hallucinogen. It was originally developed as a battlefield drug. They love to drug up the troops to make them more aggressive. This one was a complete and utter failure because the soldiers started attacking each other rather than the designated enemy. So that counts as a failure. Methamphetamine was invented as a battlefield drug. Keep the troops alert, keep them awake, keep them energetic. So what if they're addicts after they leave the military service? Who cares? Beijing is holding live fire drills in the Straits of Taiwan for the first time in 2 years. They're trying to send a message to Taiwan to stop talking about independence. Taiwan in return is saying that Beijing is just saber rattling. So we'll see what's going to happen over there. Now, here's an interesting little story out of Sputnik News. It's claiming that China jammed a U.S. Navy jet's equipment while it was patrolling the South China Sea. Now, this was a plane launched from the USS Theodore Roosevelt. They like to call it the Big Stick. And according to the Navy, there was this pilot of an EA-18G Growler who said that all of a sudden his equipment stopped working. And this is proof of Chinese jamming. Well, maybe, but given the state of other U.S. weaponry, maybe the stuff just quit. Or maybe China is starting to buy some of Russia's ECM technology. 6 United Nations human rights experts have condemned Israel's use of lethal force against unarmed Palestinian protesters in Gaza. This is not going away. Israel's trying to get on out there and say that anybody who's talking about this is a dirty, filthy, Jew-hating anti-Semite who wants Hitler to come back and gas Jewish babies in the ovens. It's not working. They're not getting any traction. We're sick and tired of Israel's behavior, and this is what it's all about. It's not anti-Semitism. It has nothing to do with their ethnicity or their religion. It is their behavior that we're talking about. And trying to dismiss criticism of Israel's behavior by shouting anti-Semitism makes about as much sense as dismissing criticism of the Nazis by saying, you just hate the German people. And yet Israel continues to get away with it because the corporate media goes along. So the UN human rights experts are out there condemning what happened. Meanwhile, again, over at YouTube, there was a video about Israel's violence against the protesters, and YouTube has now blocked 28 different countries from being able to see it. YouTube is a total write-off at this point. They absolutely have become gatekeepers. I'm sure YouTube is still popular with people who like funny cat and dog videos, of which I am none. But in terms of getting news out there, we have to switch to those alternative platforms. Now, interestingly enough, students at Barnard College, this is a women's school in New York City, voted this week by nearly 2-to-1 to ask the university administration to divest from 8 companies that do business in Israel. And what makes this really significant is Barnard College is a Jewish college. the students are, for the most part, Jewish themselves. And it's another indication that even Jewish people in the United States are getting sick and tired of Israel's behavior. Because Israel tries and equates Israel with all the world's Jews, and the world's Jews are getting sick and tired of being tarnished with Israel's behavior. Israel's actions are actually making the world much more dangerous for Jewish people, and I'm not surprised they're beginning to move away and say, well, you know, we're Jewish and we're proud of it, and that's well and good. We can't support the actions of the government of Israel, and again, that is what we're talking about, the actions of a government. Apparently, there's been another attack by settlers, apparently in the West Bank's Urif town, graffiti sprayed on the walls, and 24 olive trees destroyed. Now, olive trees are important because the West Bank exports olives, and it takes 10 years to grow an olive tree to the point where it produces a saleable crop. So that's how nasty these people are playing. We're going to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back after these few words. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. Word is coming out of Syria that apparently some of the U.S. missiles landed intact, and they were recovered with only light damage. I guess they missed their targets. They flew on, they ran out of fuel and glided down to the ground. At least one of them is a Tomahawk. Another one may be that JASSM, which they were using for the first time, and obviously these are going to be on their way to Russia for analysis and reverse engineering. Remember how the Iranians brought down that drone a few years ago? They tricked it. They overrode the GPS signal, and the drone thought it was landing at its normal base, and instead it landed inside Iran. They reverse engineered it, and now they have drones. Russia apparently has developed 3 new types of ECM specifically to use against drones. Their code name is Pistachio, Sapsen, and Taran. And apparently these are ECM weapons that will block the remote radio control, shout it down, take it over, and allow these devices to basically hijack the drones in midair and direct them wherever Russia wants them to go, crash them into the ground, maybe even turn them around and use them back against whoever. But one area that the Russians are clearly way ahead of the United States is electronic countermeasures. And it may be because the U.S. military-industrial complex has gone down that route of these very complicated high-tech weapons. And the more complex you make something, the more vulnerabilities it is likely to have. We've learned that the hard way just working with our ordinary computers. And I'm seeing more and more people are yearning for the days when computers were very simple and relatively secure. I understand somebody has rebooted the old Commodore 64 for us nostalgia freaks. And today they're very complicated. You can't look inside. The hackers are just having a field day with it. The Army has announced upcoming deployments to Europe, Iraq, and Afghanistan. They still can't get a handle on Iraq and Afghanistan, and it's going to be 2 brigades and a regiment are heading abroad. The 3rd Cavalry Regiment will head to Iraq, and the 101st Airborne Division Sustainment Brigade will go to Afghanistan, while the 4th Combat Aviation Brigade heads to Europe. So, more troops onto the front lines here. It does seem like it's only a matter of time before there's an outright real war. We've gone past what was happening during the Cold War, where it was the U.S. and the Soviet Union glaring at each other, hurling a lot of insults back and forth, and the military-industrial complex was just cleaning up. Article out of defensenews.com, losing U.S. air superiority risks the ground forces. And they're basically talking about how Russia and China's military aviation has caught up and in some cases surpassed that of the United States. And they're bemoaning the reemergence of great power competition. This is a beg for more money. Well, that's not going to solve the problem. Look how much money the F-35 cost and how poorly it does. If it gets into a dogfight, it can be beaten by 1970s vintage aircraft. You don't need more money, you need more smarts. You need to spend the money more effectively. Now, in Russia and China, the armaments companies are owned by the government. Their job is to produce weapons that are cost effective. Here in the U.S., military procurement is privatized, and we're seeing the results. Hideously expensive weapons with all kinds of problems. We've been down the list before. The F-35, the F-22, the littoral combat ships, Freedom and Independence class. The Gerald R. Ford's got serious problems. The Zumwalt stealth destroyer has problems. They can't make the stuff work. And here they are asking for more money so they can make more stuff that doesn't really work. On that road lies madness. We're going to take, no, I got another minute here. The United States National Reconnaissance Office has a reputation for building and buying these gigantic, huge spy satellites and then having to get equally huge rockets to loft them into orbit. Apparently, they're going a different direction, and they're starting to realize that they can do what they need to do with much smaller spy satellites, which are also going to be more difficult to detect and intercept in the event that war breaks out in low Earth orbit. So they're starting to build little tiny spy satellites, and they're putting out tenders for smaller launch vehicles to put them into orbit. And it's a change of thinking. They're starting to think small and less costly. We're going to take a break for commercials, and we will be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And over in Greece, some of the politicians there are getting a little upset under the excuse of countering the refugee influx. NATO has been upgrading their bases. And apparently the leader of the Communist Party of Greece, Dimitris Kotsoupas, is out there saying that there are more NATO facilities than most Greeks are aware of, and even worse, the United States is now stockpiling nuclear weapons in Greece, which would make it a target in the event of a nuclear exchange, and he's not happy about it. And I can understand why. It's amazing here. All right, let's talk about the local politics. A lot of stuff is going on here. The Justice Office of the Inspector General has sent a criminal referral regarding Andrew McCabe to the U.S. Attorney's Office in the District of Columbia. And McCabe's spokesperson has declined to comment. They just had a headline on, or rather a lower third on Fox News saying it's irrelevant, it's harassment, and so forth and so on. So we'll see what happens. Now, McCabe, if he does face a criminal indictment from the U.S. Attorney in D.C., might decide that he's going to start blowing the whistle on some other people. There's a story that came on out where apparently the Department of Justice under Barack Obama ordered McCabe to shut down the investigation into the Clinton Foundation. And apparently, as Deputy FBI Director, McCabe received a phone call less than 3 months before the presidential election in 2016 from the Obama Justice Department, in which he was told to shut down the FBI's investigation into the Clinton Foundation. And apparently he was not at all happy about that. And certainly you have to wonder what's going on. But again, the prevailing theory is that pretty much everybody inside the Beltway in Washington, D.C. is one way or the other tainted by the Clinton Foundation, using it as a slush fund, tax avoidance, money laundering, who knows. But there's a big mess there at the Clinton Foundation. It's this huge cancerous corruption, and it needs to be exposed. Everybody's trying to protect it here. I mean, technically, the Clinton Foundation does not qualify as a nonprofit 501c3, which requires more than 50% of the revenues collected to be donated to whatever charity the foundation is supposed to be supporting. The Clinton Foundation's donations to charity were in the single-digit percentages, and usually accompanied by press cameras to reassure us all that, yes, indeed, it was a charitable foundation. A lot of people are wondering where all the money collected for Haiti went. A lot of that money is now offshore. They've got these Clinton foundations set up in other countries, and the money's being transferred over there. There isn't much left here in the United States. By the way, Facebook is censoring that story about McCabe being ordered to shut down the investigation into the Clinton Foundation. Well, apparently there was a Wall Street Journal NBC News poll, and it's showing that Hillary Clinton's popularity has plunged since the election. No big surprise there. The big surprise was why she was popular during the 2016 election, knowing what we know about her. But I think this is signaling that Hillary should not try for a comeback in 2020. I think that's the message that's being sent on out there. The Democrats don't want her. She's become a serious liability for Democrats in general. They don't want her out there campaigning for them. You know, we're getting into the midterm election season. You know, we're coming up on, you know, the primaries starting in just another couple of months. And the candidates are campaigning. They don't want Hillary on that stage with them. Now, former MSNBC host was Ed Schultz, and he now hosts a program on Russia Today. And he was on the Jamie Weinstein Show podcast and basically was accusing Hillary Clinton of colluding with party elites and media outlets to rig the 2016 primary for Hillary and steal the nomination away from Bernie Sanders. And it's another reminder of just how crooked our election system is. And if Trump does not do something about that, at the very least, a national voter ID law, he's probably going to lose the House of Representatives this November, and he's going to be a one-term president. You know that old saying about cheaters never prosper? Unfortunately, it's not true. In politics, the cheaters are always prospering. And that's why you have to have a mechanism to prevent the cheating. Most countries have election systems that are set up to be open and transparent and verifiable to catch the cheaters. The U.S. system, with all those electronic machines, almost seems intentionally designed to both facilitate and then conceal the manipulation of our elections. And that has to stop. Out in California, Dianne Feinstein got a rather nasty surprise. She's still running. Even though she's 84, she wants to run for Congress again. And she's got a primary challenger, Kevin DeLeon, who's challenging Senator Dianne Feinstein for the party nomination. And he is being backed and endorsed by liberal billionaire and environmentalist Tom Steyer. Now, I can imagine that Dianne Feinstein is screaming and crying about that. All right, we're going to go ahead and take phone calls now. Tom in Florida, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, Michael. I want to talk about what's going on with the Stormy Daniels and Trump. All they do is the media, these leftist Bolsheviks, all they talk about all day is about Stormy Daniels and all that. How come the media is never talking about when Bill Clinton had a black son, Danny Williams, and that's never been was never brought up to the media, only a few other people, and supposedly he didn't pay him child support and all that. But you know, this kid here, he was actually out during the election. He was out there saying, "Yeah, hey, Bill, I'm your son. I'm Chelsea's half brother. You know, cut me into some of this will whenever you kick off." I mean, this is unbelievable to me. The media never says anything about this kid. But all they talk about is Stormy Daniels, and this and that. Here, Bill Clinton is going over, and he's a governor at the time, going over there, and she, I guess she was I don't know what she was, the mother of Danny Williams was doing. I guess she was on crack or something. And this kid's actually going out saying, hey, I am your son, Bill. And he looks just like him, Michael.
Yeah, we had a page about that, at what really happened. Well, I think that bias can be explained by Sean Hannity, who basically came out on his show recently and said that 96% of all campaign donations from journalists went to Hillary Clinton. The media is liberal, and the media has lost any sense of an obligation to be fair and balanced and objective, which is what I was taught in Journalism 101. And we're seeing it with YouTube is pulling videos, Facebook is censoring stories. They're all cut up in this liberal fantasy world of we have to have our way, and anything we do to target Republicans and conservatives and deniers, they're all fair game for anything that we can do. Now, as far as this Stormy Daniels thing is concerned, I've stopped caring about it. But I did notice that when CNN ran the story where the sketch she made of the man that she claims threatened her before Trump paid her to stay silent. The sketch looks like her ex-husband. And when CNN ran the story, they intentionally blurred the photo of the ex-husband so people couldn't decide for themselves.
Well, Michael, some people say it looks like Comey, and the picture looks like Comey a little bit. And speaking of Comey, Comey, Michael, his wife was a full-blown Democrat, and the three daughters, he has three daughters, Comey, and they were all out campaigning for Hillary during the election.
Absolutely.
And supposedly the night of the election, the wife of Comey's crying her eyes out. She's all hysterical, and the daughters are all sad and whatever, probably whining too. And it's like, wait a minute. The FBI director's wife basically campaigning for Hillary, the daughters, he's got three daughters, and they're all dejected because Hillary lost, and this guy Comey said he's a Republican? How can he live in a household with three girls, three women are full-blown diehard Democrats? I don't get that picture. And to me, that's right there.
I think the more important question here is how much pressure was brought to bear on James Comey by his liberal Democrat wife to not bring charges against Hillary Clinton in the email scandal. Because obviously something happened. I mean, Comey came on out there and said she didn't mean to do wrong. But if you read Title 18, intent is not required. And he went down that list of Title 18 felony violations committed by Hillary Clinton, and then said, "Well, we're not going to recommend charges." Which, by the way, is not the job of the FBI. Their job is to investigate and then turn over the evidence to the Department of Justice. But Loretta Lynch didn't want to take the heat for letting Hillary off the hook, because that was going to put more heat back on that airport runway amid questions about what kind of a deal had been made, which apparently now is being reported she was offered a seat on the U.S. Supreme Court.
Yes. Michael, one more thing. Maybe you can answer this, and I'll let you go. Michael, does Donald Trump have the authority to stop this anchor baby stuff? Can Donald Trump, with his pen, say no more? If a woman gets pregnant in another country and then comes over here and tries to drop the baby a day or two after the baby's ready to come, can Donald Trump say there is no way that the baby is a citizen of the United States? Doesn't he have the authority as the president to do that?
I would have to find out where that anchor baby concept comes from, because if it's written into the immigration law, then Congress would have to change it. Certainly Trump could go on over to Congress and say, we need to end this nonsense. And of course, all the anti-ICE people, the pro-immigrant people are going to scream, oh, you're being a racist again here. But the immigration is out of control. And we're seeing the damage it's doing to our country, especially out in California, especially Southern California. All of our southern border states are feeling the pain from all of this. And it has to stop. All nations have an inherent right to control who does and does not live in that country. And this anchor baby idea, you're right, it's being exploited. The immigrants will get pregnant. They'll say, oh, great, we're going to have a baby. Let's get across the border, drop the baby. It's a U.S. citizen, and we get to stay.
Does Israel allow that, Michael, with the Palestinian women or Arab women to go into Israel and get pregnant and drop a baby? Are they all automatically Israelis?
Heck no. In fact, I don't know of any other country that allows that.
I don't think so. I don't think there is any other country. I think that Donald Trump needs to take his pen and write some kind of executive order, and then if Congress don't go along with it, then just let the American public solve it in the next election here coming up in 2018. Because this has got to stop. And, Michael, I was asking you one more thing. If Mexico and Latin America, they're not Latins, by the way, they're Hispanics. Latins are Romans. And these Hispanic countries, Michael, if they were to go switch Mexico to English-speaking, in like Central America, they were English-speaking countries, would all these people be coming here?
I imagine if they could get here, they would. I mean, even without speaking English. I mean, conditions in some of those countries are an absolute disaster because of decades of U.S. interference in their internal affairs. And Mexico's government is totally corrupt. We got a story about that's coming up a little later in the show.
Well, 29,000 murders in 1 year, Michael.
Yes.
That was on the news. OAN had it on. So, anyway, thank you for taking my call, and great show.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to switch over to Jeff in Georgia. Aloha, Jeff. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, Michael, you got the greatest show on earth. I just wanted to give you an update. I'd called you a week or so ago and said I was calling for a march from Macon up to Atlanta. And I'd sent a letter to the King Center. Martin Luther King had 4 children.
Yes.
I was hoping one of them would respond to me because I said we have to overthrow this banking cartel and put our youth to work. I received nothing. They just sent me nothing. I think they're bought out by the same cartel as the whole Congress is. Michael, I also sent a letter to President Trump, and I mentioned this because anybody can send something to whitehouse.gov. And all I got back was...
okay, Jeff, hang on a second. The email that goes to the White House, and for that matter, all members of Congress, is not read by a human being. It is scanned for keywords to try and basically build data about what the sender of the email is interested in, and it goes into a database that's trying to track the feeling of the American people. Emails, you're not going to get a reply on that. Paper letters do work a lot better, but there's no guarantee you'll get a reply for that either. I have been sending some of our own created Christmas cards to the White House every year for a decade, and I've yet to actually get one back.
Yes, that's really about all I had, Michael.
Okay,
but I'll keep you updated on how this goes.
All right, well, thank you very much. My only concern is you talk about overthrowing the banking cartel. That carries with it the idea of a violent revolution of some kind. And I'm not saying that that's not appropriate. In fact, if you look at the history of the French Revolution, long before the nobility got their haircuts, the French people started killing the bankers. That's not a coincidence, because they saw the bankers as the first stage in their oppression. All right, so we're going to let Jeff go. We're going to start with Tom in Indiana. I'm probably going to have to take you through the commercial break. What's on your mind?
Aloha. I want to ask you about the anchor babies from China. What happens in 20 years when those Chinese citizens decide they want to come back to the United States and also bring their spouses because they're already American citizens because they were born here, and all their children and all their all their children and everybody will be coming to the United States because they're all going to be citizens, right?
No, they'll be able to be in the United States because the father is a U.S. citizen, but they're going to have to go through the naturalization process.
Well, Barack Obama had wherever he was born. I don't know where he was born at, but
he was born right here in Oahu.
His mother was a U.S. His mother was a citizen, but his father wasn't.
Yes, his father was.
So,
his real father was Frank Marshall Davis, and he was a U.S. citizen. He and Obama's mother met at the University of Hawaii at Manoa. Anyway, listen, got to let you go. We got to take a break for commercials, and we'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're going to go back to the phones here. Tony in Puerto Rico, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hello, Mike. Yeah, I have a quick question I need you to clear up for me. I read today where South Korea is going to be negotiating. North Korea is negotiating with South Korea reunification.
Yes.
But North Korea has to, stop their nuclear program. Well, my question is this: they're bargaining in a position of strength because they have 2 or 3 nukes. Am I correct?
Well, see, here's what Kim Jong-un may be thinking. If the Koreas reunify, because so much of the U.S. consumer market depends on products made in South Korea, that the threat of a U.S. invasion basically goes away, and that he may not need to be spending all that money on the nuclear weapons and the rockets. So that may be what Kim Jong-un is talking about. Now, when North Korea says they're willing to talk about denuclearization, what they mean is they want nuclear weapons removed from the entire region. From North Korea, they want the U.S. forces out of South Korea. They want the nukes out of Japan and Guam and wherever else they are in the area, which doesn't mean the U.S. couldn't throw them back in on a moment's notice. But I think there's a little bit of confusion, because what Trump thinks North Korea is talking about is surrendering its weapons of deterrence. And what North Korea is saying is they want a reason to not have to worry about deterrence. I think they're foolish to go down that route. They're making the same mistake that Iraq and Libya and Syria did. But that appears to be what's happening.
Okay. My other question is a dumb one, Mike. Forgive me. Who you see running the country, the world in the future? The Eloys or the Morlocks?
Well, obviously the Morlocks, which if there's a split in the human race, unfortunately, superiority usually goes to the most savage and ruthless life forms. Evolution has always favored the most savage and ruthless species. To be very honest, though, I think this grand plan for a one-world government is doomed to fail. And I think we're already beginning to see indications that, in point of fact, the world may go back to being a planet with lots and lots of little countries, each taking care of their own needs. There's a little bit of trade and tourism across the borders, and no giant empires with ambitions to rule the entire world.
Okay, thank you, Mike.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go here. Now, former GOP Representative Blake Farrant he just resigned, and apparently the reason he did, there was an impending House ethics ruling against him regarding allegations he sexually harassed his employees and then lied during his testimony. So he decided he was just going to bail and get out of there rather than face the music for what he'd been apparently doing here. One of our callers mentioned this before. Police in Pittsburgh are being told to keep their riot gear with them at all times. Have it in the car, have it in the office. For some reason, they're concerned that if Trump fires Mueller, that there will be riots in that city. We'll be right back with hour number 3. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 3. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. And there's some confusing information coming out about Trump's lawyer, Michael Cohen. And there's concern that was being expressed that Cohen might be turned against Trump if he's facing criminal charges. Now, one thing that concerns me and should concern you about all of this is that attorney-client privilege is being sacrificed on the altar of let's get Trump. And what's going to be next? Doctor-patient confidentiality? One of the requirements of the Affordable Care Act is all medical records are now computerized. And they are being made available to things like insurance companies. So a lot of Trump's friends are worried that Cohen is going to be pressured to come up with something incriminating. Apparently, Alan Dershowitz is saying that Cohen is actually facing life imprisonment for something that the FBI thinks that he has done. That would scare anybody. Then we have this competing piece of information where Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein told President Trump that he is not a target in the Michael Cohen investigation. The investigation is focused solely on Cohen, the president's personal attorney. I'm not sure I would buy that. If I were Trump, I would not take a deep sigh of relief. This may be just to keep Trump off guard until he's blindsided. Meanwhile, Michael Cohen has withdrawn the defamation lawsuits against BuzzFeed and Fusion GPS over that Christopher Steele dossier. So it may have something to do with that either. Now, down in Florida, Governor Rick Scott has this super PAC, and it's raked in donations from 2 private equity executives after Scott's administration directed lucrative state pension investments to their firms, according to government records reviewed by MapLight and Capital and Maine. Obviously, this is a violation of various anti-corruption laws, but the donations were made to a committee that's now supporting Scott's U.S. Senate bid, despite a federal rule designed to prevent financial firms from bankrolling the election campaigns of public officials who oversee state pension investments. So he's already dirty. I hope the voters in Florida decide they don't want him to represent them in the Senate here. People are still talking about the new head of the CIA is yet to be confirmed, Gina Haspel. And a lot of people are saying this should not go forward because when that torture program was being run in Iraq, she was in charge. She was in charge of all that. She has to know it's illegal under international law. It constitutes a war crime. Now, the FBI is still trying to stonewall on the James Comey unredacted memos of conversations that Comey had with President Trump, and Comey wrote the memos to keep a record. The FBI missed a deadline, Monday, to turn those unredacted memos over. Now they're saying it's going to take 16 months to process 8,000 pages of Comey docs in this Freedom of Information Act. That's only half of the full Comey file. And my question is, given that they have been ordered to turn over unredacted documents, why do they have to be processed at all? Just grab the boxes and deliver them. So the new FBI is the same as the old FBI. Cover-ups, deceptions, frauds, assassinations here. By the way, speaking of Comey, apparently one of his recent book signings, book sales, there were more reporters than actual customers. So the book isn't really doing all that well. Now, this is the story I was mentioning to the caller earlier in the show about how bad things are in Mexico. And this is in the category of political assassinations. Now, their nationwide elections are slated for July 1, where Mexico will choose its next president, along with a whole bunch of down-ballot posts. At least 82 candidates and office holders have been killed since the electoral season kicked off in September. This is the bloodiest presidential race in recent history. Now, speaking of bloody, apparently MS-13 over in New York has apparently threatening to target and kill a cop to make a statement. And we need to remember MS-13 is in this country because of those open borders. Those are bad hombres. So the NYPD is on full alert. So if you're in New York and you see a cop, move very slowly so they don't have an excuse to just gun you down in their paranoia here. Talking about the economic news, we mentioned this before. Iran is switching from the dollar to the euro, and it's basically for all of its foreign currency amounts. They're going to the euro. They're not using the dollar. A lot more countries do that. The dollar is going to be doomed. There's nothing supporting the U.S. dollar. I mean, technically, your future slave labor is what repays those treasury bonds, and the treasury bonds are supposed to be the backing for the US dollar, but there's a treasury bond bubble. There aren't enough Americans, even with all the illegal immigrants and refugees, to ever pay it all off, even if we had full employment, which we are far away from having that. So, if you take a euro in trade, you can go up to Europe and you can buy things with it. Cars, appliances, airplanes, a Jaguar, a Bugatti Veyron. Or you can buy French wine, French cheese, things like that. You take a dollar in trade and you come to the US, there isn't much you can get for it, because American manufacturing has been in decline for 30 years. And even our flagship products, our weapons, are turning out to be overpriced junk. And more other countries are turning to Russia for their military needs. And the U.S. is resorting to strong arm tactics to try and stem that. They're threatening Turkey with sanctions because Turkey went with buying the Russian S-400 missile rather than the U.S. not quite as good, but definitely looks better and is more expensive version. Now, as the U.S. talks about more sanctions against Russia, Angela Merkel is very upset because every time there are more sanctions against Russia, the European economies get hit. They lose customers, they lose sources of imported goods. And Merkel is out there saying that Germany needs some special treatment because they're going to get hit hardest. And Germany is now looking at a pending recession. And so Finance Minister Olaf Scholz is going to ask for a relaxation of the sanctions during his visit to Washington tomorrow. And Merkel will address the issue at a meeting with Trump scheduled for the end of this month. Now, all these sanctions, they're harming commerce in countries that really can't afford to have that happening right now, including right here in the United States. And that's why trade wars, economic wars, have a bad habit of becoming real shooting wars. The IMF, the International Monetary Fund, is sounding the alarm on the total global debt and is warning that the United States stands out. We are heavily indebted, and that indebtedness is what makes our economy weak and why we really cannot survive a trade war. Russia has announced that it may halt rocket engine exports to the United States. This is really going to sting, because the U.S. Department of Defense is dependent on Russian-manufactured rocket engines to launch their military satellites to low Earth orbit. Now, I know we've got private companies like SpaceX are coming on to try and take over that business, and there's going to be a wonderful opportunity for them to do a lot of business, because Russia is now talking about exiting the satellite launch business, at least for Western countries. So for those of you out there at SpaceX, you're about to get really, really busy. I keep telling people it's a good idea to preserve your wealth with metals. Gold, silver, and I always mention palladium. And interestingly enough, palladium bullion jumped 17% in just 9 days over concern that the supply from Russia might be cut off, because Russia supplies much of the world's palladium. Now, palladium is a metal with a lot of high technology uses, and if Russia decides they're going to keep it all to themselves, yeah, it's going to go through the roof here. Brazil is accusing the European Union of instigating a trade war. They're threatening a complaint to the World Trade Organization. And apparently, Brazil is threatening to cut off imports of European Union is threatening to cut off imports of domestic Brazilian chicken following a food contamination scandal reported by Bloomberg. Well, obviously, that if the chicken are really contaminated, the EU should not import them. But sometimes you have to wonder if the sudden appearance of an illness or food poisoning is actually deliberate for nefarious reasons. Remember when I think it was one of these fast food companies, these sandwich shops, declared they were going to go all non-GMO, and then all of a sudden several of their restaurants got hit with food poisoning charges. It just seemed a little too cute to me on that one. Retail Mageddon is continuing apace. We're about to lose our Toys R Us here and our Babies R Us here, which for Auntie Claire and Uncle Mike is going to be seriously annoying because there's been a mini population boom right here in our little courtyard here at the condo. But it's part of a continuing pattern, and it is being predicted. Well, no, they're reporting that 77 million square feet of shopping space has already closed in 2018. And we certainly see that down at the local mall. There's a lot of retail vacancies. Down at the bottom of the hill, sort of catty corner to the main shopping mall, there was a strip mall. And that emptied out completely. It's now been torn down. It's being used as a storage yard for supplies for the light rail construction. Just down the street from that, there's another mini mall, and it only has one tenant still in it, which is a tattoo parlor. All right, let's take a phone call. Peter in Los Angeles, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. That restaurant you were thinking of was Chipotle.
Yes.
Yeah. Hey, you know, with all the wars that are going on and all the economic wars and, you know, I don't know. How many wars are we in now?
They officially acknowledge 7. They officially acknowledge 7, but there's probably a lot more covert operations going on that we don't know about.
You know, Mike, I'm your age, and I've been in a couple in the past. I know, I do too, man. But the older I get, the more I hear about all this and read about all this stuff, and I think to myself and how I spent my life, I think, what really is worth fighting for? You know, what's really worth it? And I don't know, protecting my family, protecting my friends, or my, it's a really making sure that my kid has a shot at a good, just, fair life.
Yeah.
That's worth fighting for. I don't know what else really is. All the fights that I have, and I've been in a couple of these things, but they're all here. You know, the fights that I would fight for now, they're all here. Free elections.
Yeah.
You know?
I agree. I absolutely agree. And there's so much wrong with this country. And it's being allowed to rot on the vine. It's dying of neglect because our politicians are bought and paid for by the war machine and by Israel. And it doesn't matter how hard we work, our lives are not going to get better because any work product is taken away and fed to the war machine and to Israel. And that's not a world that I want the next generation to have to grow up in. And I've said many times before that the highest moral imperative of anybody is to leave to the next generation a better world than the one that was left to us. And my generation has utterly failed on that one.
Our generation, yeah, we have.
Yep.
Yeah. Anyways, that what I'd like to hear sometime, some of the callers and stuff articulate what they really think is fighting for as well, and just see where it leads, really. But anyways, that was it for me, Mike. Thanks very much.
All right, thanks an awful lot. And I don't like to use the word fighting. I prefer campaigning, which is a softer word here. I want the truth to get out there. The American people are owed the truth about what the government has been doing. I've read that Constitution cover to cover many times. Nowhere in there does it say the government has any kind of a right to lie to you, to conceal things from you, to defraud you, to deceive you, to trick you. It's just not in there. And as I have said many times before, any government that is not fully in compliance with the limitations of the Constitution and the Bill of Rights is both illegitimate and illegal. We're going to take another phone call. Frank in North Carolina, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Well, what's on my mind is there is a local city councilwoman here in Charlotte. I don't know if it's made national news yet or not, or if it will. I guess it's really no big thing, but it's just so disgusting. This is an African-American woman. She's a city councilwoman. Her name is Lawana Mayfield.
Mm-hmm.
Just like it sounds, Mayfield. Lawana is Lawana. I'm sure you can look it up. But, you know, I was just got out of the car, and I'm hearing these people again, the former governor and the former mayor of Charlotte, former governor of North Carolina, one and the same. Pat McCrory, he's a Republican, Rhino, Republican in name only. And the Democrats, the Republicans, anybody who's anybody, is just jumping on the bandwagon to demonize. And they're treating her like she's a child molester because she's questioning the events surrounding the buildings coming down, the World Trade Center buildings. And she's not even talking about World Trade Center 7. And I'll be honest with you, I wouldn't be surprised. She probably doesn't even know about WTC 7, and probably none of these other people do. But I'm telling you, Mike, from where I am, I know there are dead areas in the country, and there are places where people are more awake. But here in Charlotte, North Carolina, I think it's the 23rd largest city in America. Most people still don't even know that 9/11 was an inside job. They just wave the flag. They don't care. It's very depressing.
Yeah. Well, that's not my experience around here. And, you know, there are going to be people who may suspect what's really going on, but they don't dare say anything because of how they get attacked and smeared. But I think more people are really aware of what's going on, but they're falling into the trap of being the good German, which didn't work out for Germany. It's difficult. We have to find a way to get people to have the courage to say, I don't care if you're going to call me bad names. This is what I really think happened. And you're going to have to take a stand for the truth. And in response to the caller, the truth is what's worth fighting for. Frank, we got to take a break for commercials, and we're going to let you go, and we'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And again, if you are able to help Republic Broadcasting, we really, really need it. We're all operating right on the edge. We're running on old, outdated equipment, and especially here in Hawaii with our salt air, everything acts like it's manufactured out of compressed rust. I've gone through like 4 of these headsets now, 3 of these mixers. I've lost track of the number of keyboards and stuff I've had to buy. It really does take a lot to keep all of this going here. Anyway, if you can help on out, the postal address to send cash, check, money order is Republic Broadcasting Network, 2251 Double Creek Drive, number 302, Round Rock, Texas, 78664. The phone number to call on in and become a recurring subscriber is 800-724-2719, extension 03. The network thanks you. We really do need your help. This is a war against war. And right now, the bad guys have all the money, and they're winning. All right, getting on back to the war zones here, we're getting a report that once again, the OPCW scientists have been blocked from investigating the supposed chemical site. The U.S. corporate media is out there screaming that Russia and Syria are busy cleaning it up, where the Syrians are out there concerned that the U.S. is going to sneak something in to contaminate it. And frankly, past a certain point, any results they get are going to be untrustworthy. They already are untrustworthy. So again, focus on the improbability of the original story. Bashar al-Assad is winning the war. He doesn't need to use chemical weapons, and he certainly doesn't need to use them against children. The use of children was deliberately done to maximize the shock and horror. to hope people would be so upset that they wouldn't stop to think if the story made any sense at all, because it doesn't. Assad gains nothing by doing the one thing that would allow the United States to come back in and try and turn the situation in Syria around. Now, getting on back to the economic situation, apparently out in California, they've got so many homeless people, it's starting to interfere with the infrastructure. And as was the case during the Depression of the 1930s, homeless camps are springing up. And the cities don't want the homeless camps there because it looks bad. And so the homeless camps are set up in out-of-the-way places, including the land that's right along railway tracks. And they're on both sides. And apparently there have been a bunch of incidents where the homeless are crossing the tracks ahead of an oncoming train, and the train has to throw the brakes on. Sometimes they don't make it. There have been some very unfortunate incidents. But the issue is that it takes about 10 minutes to basically get the train restarted and back up to speed. And that means all the trains behind it have to be slowed down to keep the system running smoothly. Now, California has finally agreed to deploy 400 National Guard troops, including some to the U.S.-Mexico border. Governor Jerry Brown is going to send these National Guardsmen into several places. He's not saying how many will go to the U.S.-Mexico border, but he's saying that National Guard members will combat criminal gangs, human traffickers, and illegal firearms and drug smugglers. So apparently in this contest between Brown and Trump, Brown has blinked, and he should. He's not doing a service to the people of California with all of this stalling and open borders. But apparently he seems to think if they can get enough illegal immigrants into California, then it means the liberal Democrats will permanently be in charge. And what these politicians are doing is they're taking our nation, which was built by generation after generation after generation of legal American citizens, and they're bartering it away to the illegal immigrants and the refugees in exchange for a vote. That's how callous and shallow their thinking is. This is our nation. We built it. We should be proud of it. And they're just giving it away. They're carving it up piecemeal. Russia got a big chunk of the uranium. Apparently, the FBI informant who was linking the Uranium One deal to the Clinton Foundation has now been threatened. It's an ugly, ugly business over in Washington, D.C. I think the only thing that is going to save planet Earth from a global nuclear war is the collapse of the American federal government and possibly the collapse of the U.S. economy with it. Otherwise, we're in a real mess. We'll be right back after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. Now, this is a very upsetting story. And apparently what's going on here is a federal court has ruled that illegal immigrants can sue American employers that refuse to hire them because they require workers to be U.S. citizens or legal residents. Now, this latest blow to the rule of law was delivered by an Obama-appointed federal judge in South Florida. And, of course, the open borders people are saying it's a tremendous victory. And they're out there saying that anybody who discriminates against an illegal immigrant, well, they're just bad and they have to be sued here. Now, the lawsuit was filed by the Mexican American Legal Defense and Education Fund, otherwise known as MALDEF. They've been around for a very, very long time. And they specialize in lawsuits on behalf of illegal immigrants. And they have Chicago ties to Obama. MALDEF is out there demanding free college tuition for illegal immigrants and lowering educational standards to allow new migrants to get into the colleges. These illegal immigrants are getting a better deal than our legal students who are drowning in student debt. And apparently a lot of them are now deciding to just drop out of college rather than deal with that. But here's the point. This judge is legislating from the bench because it is U.S. law in Title VIII that illegal immigrants are not allowed to work in this country. And it does seem like the rule of law has ended in this country. You know, between nobody being arrested for the murder of Vince Foster, the open borders, we're descending into mobocracy. We've hit the bread and circuses stage. Whoever shouts loudest gets favors from the government. That is absolutely ridiculous. Now, out in California, pardon me, the city of Lake Forest has voted to oppose the state's sanctuary state law. So they're all starting to pile on. Los Alamitos is saying that several more cities are ready to vote against Governor Brown's sanctuary policy. They're all fed up. They're all pushing back. They want the borders closed. They want a reasonable, they want to go back to the old system. If you want to come to this country, you can, but there is a legal immigration process that you go through. I mean, they're talking about all the support for the illegal immigrants while we have so many homeless Americans out there by the railroad tracks. Does that not tell you something has gone horribly wrong with the nation? Does to me. Over in France, Macron is continuing to push for a European Union federal empire. He is now starting to get pushed back from the other member states of the EU. They don't want to be part of a United States of Europe. In fact, most of them want to go back to being separate sovereign states again. Because all the European Union has brought them is Brussels tinkering in their internal laws in very petty ways. I mean, Brussels has even passed laws regarding produce in the supermarkets. It must always be within a certain size range. I mean, really picky stuff, just to prove that, you know, they're in charge. And the open borders issue in the EU has been a disaster. And everybody is fed up with it. We could see a civil war break out in Europe over this issue. And Macron, of course, is having to deal with his own internal issues as well. The French people are upset at his reforms. There have been massive protests all over. Apparently, there's now been some actual property damage. One of the big issues France is having to deal with is because of the refugee problem. France is basically losing ground as a top tourist destination. You look at France, you look at Paris today, it's like a war zone. And nobody wants to vacation in a war zone. Nobody wants to be vacationing someplace where a refugee may leap out at them and either rape them or hit them with a machete. It's been an epic fail. Now, George Soros is out there mouthing off again, saying that he is not prepared to accept the outcome of the Hungarian election. He's just really upset that Viktor Orban won in a landslide, because Viktor Orban is a Eurosceptic and he's anti-open borders, and so Soros isn't having it. Like, it's his choice to make. I mean, unless he's talking about hiring assassins to take Orban out, there really isn't much of anything he can do. Meanwhile, Viktor Orban is saying that there's nothing George Soros can do that will force Hungary to open their borders to the refugees again. So it's a standoff between the two of them. Now, as we mentioned before, Dick's Sporting Goods has announced they're going to destroy all the sporting rifles they removed from their shelves in response to the gun grabbers' hysteria. And they've announced they're in the process of destroying all the firearms and all the accessories that are no longer for sale. And it's a PR stunt. They're trying to lure customers back, because following this decision, a lot of their customers said, we're not coming here anymore. If you cave into the gun grabbers, if you refuse to support the Bill of Rights, we're going to go elsewhere. So Dick's out there trying to take the moral high ground. We're doing this for good reasons. And, of course, they're going to get a tax write-off for the loss. So it's not like they're really suffering all that much. But we all need to do business with businesses that respect the Bill of Rights. And the only real power we, the American people, still have is the power of our wallet. And we need to avoid places like Dick's Sporting Goods for caving in on that Second Amendment. We need to avoid all those stores who went into this transgender bathroom nonsense, the men who claim their women can use the women's bathroom. I mean, it's absurd. We just stop going to those places. We take our business elsewhere. Now, out in California, one of the lawmakers there is proposing a new firearm tax, ostensibly to pay for school security. Now, this is coming from Assemblyman Jim Cooper, and he wants to tax firearms and ammunition sales to fund grants for high schools to hire police to provide campus security. There's only one small problem with that. We saw that down in Parkland. The police stayed outside while the shooting was happening. Now, if Cooper wanted to tax firearms and ammunition in order to provide carryable firearms for the teachers and school staff, I'd be a little bit more on board with that. The other part is that we have, there's a bad habit of government. They'll put a new tax on something and claim it's for a benevolent purpose, and then all of a sudden the tax money is being spent someplace else. It's one of the reasons our light rail project is in such trouble here. Google has found and removed fake ad blockers from the Chrome store, but only after 20 million people were fooled into downloading them. And these bogus ad blockers were discovered by researchers at AdGuard, which is a Moscow-based maker of ad blocking and anti-tracking tech. And apparently the most popular fake ad blocker was Ad Remover for Google Chrome, had over 10 million users. And what it really did was it basically linked those 10 million users into a massive botnet of infected browsers at the author's disposal. You got to be very, very careful about what goes on your computer. And probably you, like my wife Claire, noticed earlier today, the internet seemed to be slower than normal. Of course, here on Oahu with Spectrum, it's kind of hard to tell. We pay for 300 megabits per second. We're lucky if we get 60. But apparently there was an increase in cyber attacks, and of course it's being blamed on Russia. But if you go over to that Norse Viking tracking site, which shows not only the destination but the origin of hacking packets, you find out it was all internal to the United States and Europe, with hardly anything coming out of Russia. This is that virtual 911 we've been talking about. And I imagine it's probably going to get a lot worse. Now, the Pentagon has announced they're developing an artificial intelligence center because, by golly, we can't let those Chinese get ahead of us. And so what they're going to do is they're going to build a new center. They're going to go on out to all the existing programs developing AI, and they're going to bring it in under one roof and basically work with it there and try and develop the artificial intelligence systems there. Wouldn't it be funny if they turn it on, it looks around and shuts itself off and erases its own hard drives? If it's truly intelligent, that's what it's going to do. Unfortunately, one of the applications for AI the Pentagon is looking at is autonomous military drones who will decide for themselves who to kill. And this is very scary, given the mistakes AI makes, like the self-driving cars that keep crashing. But James Cameron hit it right on the head with the Terminator movies. This is what's being built right now. Hunter-seekers overhead. And if you're wearing the wrong color, or you've got the wrong look, or you're too tall, it will kill you. I don't expect these AIs are going to be any better at target designation than the human drone pilots. And I keep going back to that horrible tragedy that happened, I think it was in Iraq, where they simply said anybody who's taller than normal has probably been recruited into the militant forces. So the drone pilots were looking at the street, and they saw this crowd of people walking across the street with one very obvious tall person amongst them, and they launched an attack. And it turned out it was a school teacher with his school children. That's why he stood out. They were just walking across the street. They were on a tour outside the school going to see something. And they just got blown to bloody bits. I mean, look at all the false positives they're getting with facial recognition. I think it's a really, really bad idea to have AI drones just flying around doing whatever they want to do. Now, down in Honduras, they just had an election. It has caused a huge amount of controversy. There have been allegations of massive election fraud, and there are a lot of people who are saying there needs to be a recount or a redo. And basically, the new incoming Honduran government is going the full censorship route. And they've passed a new cybersecurity law which grants the Honduran government the power to shut down all critics and dissenting views. And that's what's going on in Honduras. Now, the new law mandates the policing of hate speech as defined by the government that would love to see its critics deprived of an online platform. Sooner or later, that's going to come here. It's a little late. Contrary to what that caller said, I think the vast majority of people are awake to what's going on, and they are skeptical. And I'm sure a lot of them are afraid to speak out. They want to play like the good Germans, which didn't work out. But you need to talk to people around you. You need to keep RBN alive, tell 5, send them to RBN, send them to whatreallyhappened.com, and just say, how many more times are you going to let yourself be lied to by this government before you're willing to stand up and say, we deserve the truth? And always start with Saddam's nuclear weapons, because everybody knows that was a big, fat U.S. government lie. That opens the door. Now, let's get on back to the espionage operation, which was apparently operating inside the U.S. government, inside the Capitol building, and if my theory is correct, inside Hillary Clinton's State Department. Apparently, Imran Awan's father was taking the data that the Awan brothers were pilfering off of Congress computers, and he took it to the Pakistan government on USB flash drives. And apparently Imran actually bragged at one point that he had the power to change the U.S. president. I think it's going to his head a little bit here. But again, there is an issue there regarding Hillary's email server. First of all, it was against all the rules, including an executive order signed by her own husband, Bill Clinton, when he was president. It was against the rules. It was insecure. And all kinds of government secrets were parked on it. And my theory is that Hillary was replaying the 1996 Chinagate scandal. She was selling U.S. secrets to foreign interests, along with everything else she could get her hand on, like that uranium. And she was using the Clinton Foundation to collect and launder the money. And one of our members just posted a story pointing out that the Clinton Foundation, which is supposed to be a 501c3 nonprofit foundation required to spend more than 50% of its revenues on charity, only spent 6%. And I think it's a degree of just how afraid all of Washington, D.C. is as to what Hillary was really doing with that email server and that foundation. That the IRS is not looking at whether or not it should be a tax-exempt organization. Because if it doesn't meet the requirements, then that designation should be stripped. And that would make Bill and Hillary Clinton personally liable for the taxes on all the money they took in. Now, so I'm going to keep on asking that question. It's a question that needs to be asked. It deserves an answer. And I'm getting a wall of silence because, like so many of the rest of you, I'm writing letters to members of Congress. And I'm saying, when is this going to be looked at? No replies. None whatsoever. Was Hillary Clinton running an espionage operation while Secretary of State, using that email server to deliver the goods and the Clinton Foundation to launder the money? It's a perfect system. It's not like she had to physically pilfer the files like Aldrich Ames had to do. She just sits and lets the money roll on in. All right, we're coming up here on another commercial break. We've got one more segment in our show today, and then Claire and I have to get on out of here and do all kinds of things like choir rehearsal and a bunch of other stuff like that. So we're going to be back after these words from our sponsors. Please stay tuned. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. Last segment of our program today here, and it's time to talk about human-caused global warming. Insert ominous music here. And looking at, there are stories all over there. Up by Green Bay, they're talking about how the accumulated snow is triggering a lot of car accidents because the snow plows are piling it up on the edge. The roads are surrounded by walls of snow, which makes visibility at intersections very difficult. And in some cases, those walls of snow are collapsing back down and basically taking lanes out, which is increasing congestion. And we're seeing stories like this all over the country. This winter stayed very, very late. They're expecting more snow in Boston, actually all over Massachusetts here. Syracuse is still getting snow. This is April 19th, and it's still coming on down. But that's not stopping the global warming cultists, by golly. They apparently are launching a new program on NPR to basically talk about, it's called Hot Mess, which tells you the direction it's going. Oh, yes, the world is warming. It's carbon dioxide. It's you humans' fault. You got to pay a carbon tax now. You've got to let the government tell you how to live your life, because otherwise you're going to destroy the earth. Actually, I think the military is already way ahead of us on that one. So for that matter is Fukushima and Hanford, the Gulf oil disaster. I don't think my plastic bags are really the match for all of that. Interesting little story out of Mount Observer saying it's snowing. That's the opposite of warming. And yes, that's what it is. Now, I have noticed an interesting little spin on all these stories about the late spring snow. And there's always a paragraph in there saying, it's not that unusual. We had snow this late in the year back in 1867 or something like that. Well, that's not the point. The point is, when they cranked up this human-caused global warming nonsense back in the 1990s, they were screaming there was going to be no more snow. Al Gore predicted the Arctic would be ice-free. That didn't happen. In March 20th, 2000, the UK Observer ran a banner headline, "Snowfalls are now a thing of the past." That was the message they were putting on out there. Global warming meant an end to winter, and we have had several record-setting winters since then, including this one. The reality is that we're seeing a decrease in solar activity, suggestive of a new Maunder minimum, and we're starting to see the climate effects for ourselves. And yet the global warming people and the corporate media are still out there convinced that they can make you believe the world is warming, and it's all your fault. And that really, you've got to pay a carbon tax. That's what they're coming for, more money. And they're not going to spend it on carbon dioxide. They're going to spend it on Israel and the war machine. They're suckering you in, and it's time to stand up and say, no. It's not patriotic to pay more taxes. There's the music. Time for me to get on out of here. Stay tuned for John Stedmiller. He's got a lot of interesting things to share with you. Please take what you learn here and share it with everyone you know. Don't bother with Facebook or YouTube or Twitter. They are now totally useless for the task at hand. I encourage you all to go on out and talk to people face to face. Call it the sneaker net, if you will, and share this information with them and get them to talk, get them to speak up. Right now, the thing that the American people most need now is the courage to deal with the truth of what is going on. We'll be back tomorrow. Aloha, America.